Welcome to Teolumen Insights, where we reveal the hidden forces that shape the way you live and show you how to use them to create real transformation and supercharge your health, mindset, and daily life. Here are your hosts, Emma Greenwood and Nathan Sinclaire.
Believe it or not, what follows is an AI-generated conversation, one designed not to mimic humanity, but to illuminate it.
Teolumen Insights, buckle up.
Hello, Teolumen Insights.
What if I told you that your DNA, right, could leave a kind of ghostly imprint?
Okay.
An imprint on reality itself, like influencing light even after the DNA is physically gone.
Wow, okay. That sounds like something straight out of science fiction.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
But what if it's not? What if our genes are doing way more than we think?
You mean like quantum connections? Information moving beyond just the physical molecules?
Exactly. Could that be happening?
Well, that's the exact rabbit hole we're diving headfirst into today. We're talking Peter Gariaev.
The phantom DNA effect.
Yes. And his really mind-bending ideas about wave genetics.
We're going to try and unpack it all, this idea of linguistic genome, DNA, as a quantum biocomputer.
And what it all might mean for, well, everything from consciousness to maybe even new kinds of medicine. It's going to be wild.
Absolutely. And for you, our fellow Teolumen Insights listener, you want to get the big picture fast, right, without getting lost in the weeds.
Yeah, we've done the sifting. We've looked at Gariev's work, the experiments, the theories.
The controversy, too.
Oh, definitely the controversy. We'll get into that. But our aim is to lay it all out, make it engaging.
You can expect some aha moments, hopefully. We're at that weird crossroads of biology and quantum physics.
It touches on stuff like junk DNA, maybe even consciousness itself.
So the information we were discussing, it's based on Gariev's research, his original experiments, how his ideas developed over time.
Right. Let's start at the beginning. The experiment that kicked this whole thing off. Peter Gariaev, 1985.
Okay, set the scene. What were they doing?
So imagine a lab. They're basically studying DNA structure by shining light through it.
Standard stuff, right? Like
Yeah.
correlation spectroscopy.
Exactly that. You shine a laser, you see how the light scatters off the DNA molecules, it tells you about their shape, how they move.
Pretty straightforward biology lab work.
Totally. They have the DNA sample in a special chamber, the laser goes in, detectors record the scattering pattern, all by the book. But then it gets weird. Really weird.
Okay, I'm ready. So they got their data with the DNA in there. Then what? They take it out.
Precisely. Remove the DNA sample, clean the chamber. Now, logically, the light should just pass through or scatter randomly, right? No DNA, no specific pattern.
Makes sense.
Except it didn't. The light kept scattering.
At a gathering.
Yeah, and not just randomly. It scattered in the exact same pattern as when the physical DNA was still in the chamber.
Wait, what? Seriously?
Seriously, it was as if the DNA had left behind some kind of energetic field and imprint in the vacuum that continued to structure the light.
A phantom imprint. That's, whoa.
Right, this is the phantom DNA effect. It fundamentally challenged physics, suggesting DNA could influence its environment even when not physically present.
And this wasn't just some glitch. They were using sensitive equipment, correlation spectroscopy.
Apparently so. The persistence of that specific pattern long after the DNA was gone, that's what made it so startling. It wasn't like a brief afterglow. It reportedly lasted.
Okay, my mind is slightly blown already. So the single bizarre finding, this became the seed for something much bigger.
Exactly. This observation was the launch pad for Gariev's grand theory, wave genetics.
Wave genetics. Okay, the name itself sounds intriguing. What's the core concept?
The core idea is, well, it's revolutionary or completely bonkers, depending on who you ask.
Huh.
It says DNA isn't just a chemical molecule storing information like a computer hard drive.
Okay.
It's also a quantum system. It actively sends and receives information using waves interacting non-locally.
Non-locally, like action at a distance, without touching.
Kind of, yeah. Think of DNA less like a static blueprint and more like a quantum antenna, broadcasting and receiving.
So it's not just the A's, T's, C's, and G's in sequence. There's another communication layer.
That's the claim. He argued DNA has these inherent non-physical properties. In his writings, like Quantum Consciousness of the Linguistic-Wave Genome, he talks about genetic info as a kind of holistic continuum.
A continuum, meaning it's all connected.
Yeah, allowing for what he called instantaneous metabolic control across the whole organism. Imagine your body's systems coordinated instantly via this DNA network.
Instantaneous. That completely throws out the slower, step-by-step chemical signaling we usually learn about in biology.
It absolutely does. It's a radical departure from the standard mechanistic view.
So instead of just a chemical recipe book, it's more like a dynamic, body-wide quantum internet.
That's a great way to put it. And this leads to another layer, the linguistic-wave nature of it all.
Linguistic, like DNA speaks the language.
In a metaphorical, but also maybe literal sense, yes. Gariaev proposed that genetic information doesn't just operate biochemically, but also follows principles similar to human language and wave patterns.
Also,
He criticized the simple model of the genetic code, 3 letters code for one amino acid. He thought it was more complex.
more complex how?
He argued the selection of an amino acid during protein building is contextual and linguistic, meaning the entire message, the whole RNA strand, matters, not just the individual 3-letter words or codons.
So the meaning of a genetic word can change depending on the sentence it's in, like human language.
Exactly. He saw DNA, RNA, and proteins as texts in a real sense. It shifts the whole view from a static plan to a dynamic interpreting information system.
Quantum texts.
Wow.
And this connects to the idea of a quantum biocomputer.
Precisely. He envisioned the genome itself acting like a biocomputer, but operating on quantum principles. Reading and interpreting these DNA, RNA, protein texts using wave phenomena.
So not just ones and Ds like our computers, but using quantum weirdness for complex biological computation.
That's the speculation. Leveraging things like superposition or entanglement to manage biological information in ways classical biochemistry can't fully explain, maybe allowing for much faster, more holistic control.
Okay, this is a lot. A quantum biocomputer inside us speaking a wave-based language. It sounds incredible. But let's be real. How has the mainstream scientific community reacted to this?
Well, with enormous skepticism, to put it mildly.
Right, I imagine so.
Much of the mainstream considers wave genetics to be pseudoscience. The criticisms focus on, well, a few key things.
Look what?
Major concerns about the experimental methodology, the lack of independent replication of that original phantom DNA effect under tightly controlled conditions.
Reproducibility is key in science, isn't it?
It's fundamental. If others can't reliably get the same results, the finding doesn't stand up.
Any other criticisms?
Yeah, also the theoretical underpinnings. Critics argue it lacks a solid foundation in established physics and biology, and sometimes seems to invoke quantum concepts inappropriately.
I remember reading about a philosopher of science, Andrew Lugg, who talked about criteria for pseudoscience. Things like relying on suspect evidence, being immune to refutation. Does wave genetics fall into that category for some?
For many critics, yes. They'd argue it fits several of those flags. There was even an anecdote, though hard to verify, about a website claiming contact with Gariaev where responses seemed evasive or written in the third person. Little things that raise eyebrows in the scientific community.
Okay. So the core issue is really that phantom DNA effect. Has anyone managed to replicate it reliably?
That's the crux of the debate. Mainstream labs have reported being unable to reproduce it. It's the biggest hurdle for the theory's acceptance.
But what did the proponents say? Gariaev and his followers. How do they respond to the replication issue?
They often argue that the phenomenon is incredibly subtle, that it requires specific conditions, maybe even a certain sensitivity in the equipment or experimenter, that conventional, perhaps more brute force methods might miss or even destroy.
The "you're not doing it right" defense. That can be tricky in science.
It can be, but it's not entirely one-sided. There are researchers who claim to have found supporting evidence.
Oh, like who?
Well, there are papers, for instance, by Professor Willie Sai-Ho Chan that assert consistent experimental support for effects related to the phantom DNA concept, if not the exact original experiment.
What kind of effects are they reporting?
Things like demonstrating that specific electromagnetic fields can induce structural changes in DNA, or alter gene expression, or influence how cells behave even from a distance.
So, influencing DNA with EM fields, that sounds a bit more conventional, maybe?
That's closer, yeah. Quantum biology is looking at EM effects. But some of these studies go further, claiming effects between physically isolated DNA samples on nearby biological systems, suggesting some kind of non-local information transfer is still happening.
But these supporting studies,
Yeah.
they're still considered fringe, outside the main consensus.
Largely, yes. They haven't convinced the broader scientific community yet. The standards for evidence, especially for such extraordinary claims, are very high.
Right. Extraordinary claims need extraordinary evidence. So Gariaev didn't just stop with the phantom effect, did he? He kept developing wave genetics.
No, he continued building the framework. He talked about the genome having like two interconnected programs running simultaneously.
Few program.
Yeah. One was like a geometric blueprint, the physical structure. The other was a meaningful text program, the linguistic wave-based information layer. He used metaphors like DNA videotapes, that the genetic apparatus reads like a biocomputer. And this reading process supposedly generates sound and light images, acoustic and electromagnetic fields that guide development.
DNA videotapes generating sound and light. It's very imaginative language.
It is, and it ties back to those proposed mechanisms for the phantom effect. How could DNA possibly leave an imprint or influence things at a distance?
Right. What are the explanations people throw around? You mentioned entanglement.
Yeah, quantum entanglement is one idea. That spooky connection where particles stay linked no matter the distance. Could DNA molecules have some entangled properties? Highly speculative in this context.
What else?
Another idea floated is water memory, the controversial notion that water can retain an imprint or memory of substances previously dissolved in it. Since DNA is in water in cells, maybe the water holds the phantom pattern.
Water memory is also pretty fringe, isn't it?
Very much so. And then there's electromagnetic resonance, the idea that DNA molecules might resonate with specific frequencies, allowing for communication via EM fields, maybe creating the phantom field.
So entanglement, water memory, EM resonance, all quite speculative and not really verified by standard methods in this context.
Correct. They remain proposed mechanisms, but lack solid, accepted experimental proof for this specific phenomenon.
Okay, let's shift focus slightly. If, hypothetically, any of this were true DNA influencing things without physical contact, what would that mean for bigger questions, like consciousness?
Now we're getting into really deep territory. The implications would be profound.
How so?
Well, if information in biological systems isn't purely material, if it can operate non-locally via waves or quantum effects mediated by DNA, that opens up entirely new ways to think about consciousness.
You mean consciousness might not be strictly confined to the brain's physical structure?
Potentially. It could lend support to theories suggesting consciousness itself has non-local aspects or operates partly on quantum principles. Maybe it's connected to this wider bioinformation field.
Gariaev himself made that link, didn't he? With his quantum consciousness of the linguistic-wave genome.
He did. He explicitly connected the functioning of the genome, particularly via proteins in the brain. He mentioned cerebral cortex proteins as potential correlates of consciousness and intellect, suggesting our thinking is tied into this wave genetic process.
So the genome as a quantum biocomputer isn't just running the body, it might be involved in thought itself.
That's the implication. If the genome processes information in a quantum way far beyond classical computation, well, maybe that helps explain some mysteries of the mind.
Like what?
Like the binding problem, how our brain integrates diverse sensory inputs into a single unified experience. Or just the sheer power and subtlety of cognition, which some argue classical models struggle to fully account for.
Could quantum processing at the DNA level contribute to that unified conscious field?
It's a fascinating speculation. It connects to broader theories of quantum consciousness, suggesting the brain isn't just a classical computer, but harnesses quantum mechanics.
And what about communication within the body, or even between organisms, if DNA signals can travel via waves?
Right, it suggests a whole other layer of biological communication beyond the standard chemical and electrical signals we know about.
A quantum or wave-based information network operating alongside the nervous system and hormones.
Possibly. If validated, it could revolutionize how we understand biological organization, development, maybe even explain phenomena like the remarkable coherence of living systems, or how seemingly separate parts act in concert.
Okay, let's bring this back down to Earth slightly. Potential applications. If any of this holds water, what could we do with it? Especially in medicine.
Well, the potential applications bandied about are pretty spectacular, though highly speculative right now.
Like what? I read something about a Roger Meacock using wave genetics tech.
Yeah, there are claims out there, like Meacock's, suggesting wave genetics technology could help the body heal itself. The idea is you capture the wave information from a youthful, healthy state, maybe from a photo, believe it or not, convert it into sound files.
Sound files?
Matrix sound files, they call them. And then listening to these files supposedly influences your current DNA expression, nudging it back towards that healthy state.
Listening to sound files to heal your DNA based on an old photo. That sounds extremely unconventional.
Extremely. Another related idea is listening to sound files derived from the DNA of, say, natural healing substances, herbs, or minerals.
Right.
The claim is your body receives the healing instructions directly through these waves or sounds.
Okay, that requires a huge leap of faith beyond current science. What about diagnostics?
There's talk of detecting unique electromagnetic signals from a person's DNA to spot disease markers much earlier or more accurately than current methods.
Like a DNA frequency signature for diseases.
Something like that. And personalized medicine, too, analyzing how an individual's DNA interacts with potential medications at this quantum or wave level to predict effectiveness or side effects before you even take the drug.
Right, these all sound potentially revolutionary. But the key word is potential. What are the hurdles to actually making any of this real validated medical tech?
The hurdles are enormous. Fundamentally, it comes back to that core scientific validation.
Reproducibility again.
Absolutely. You need rigorously reproducible effects, first and foremost. Then you need measurable parameters. What exactly is being transmitted? How strong is it? How do you quantify it?
Standardized protocols.
Yes, protocols that anyone can follow and get the same result. You need to rule out confounding factors, especially the placebo effect, which is huge in healing contexts.
And peer review, publication in reputable journals.
All of it. Without clearing those very high bars, these concepts, however intriguing, will likely stay theoretical or on the fringes. The path from fringe idea to validated medical technology is incredibly long and difficult.
It seems like Gariaev's work really represents a potential paradigm shift, doesn't it? If true.
It absolutely does. It challenges the very foundations of molecular biology by introducing quantum and wave-based information directly into genetics.
It feels connected to that whole emerging field of quantum biology, right? Where people are finding quantum effects in photosynthesis, bird navigation.
Exactly. Quantum biology is cautiously exploring where quantum mechanics genuinely plays a functional role in life. Wave genetics pushes that boundary much, much further into more controversial territory.
But it highlights that intersection of physics and biology, which has historically been so fruitful, right? Applying physical principles to understand life.
Definitely. Think of discovering the structure of DNA itself, physics and chemistry applied to biology. If the phantom DNA effect or wave genetics were ever validated, it would be another monumental bridge between these fields.
It really underscores the need for cross-disciplinary thinking, doesn't it? Biologists, physicists, information theorists.
For sure. Tackling these kinds of boundary-pushing questions requires collaboration.
So, wrapping things up, Peter Gariaev's work. Phantom DNA, wave genetics, DNA as a linguistic quantum biocomputer. It's undeniably fascinating.
Fascinating and deeply controversial. It challenges our core understanding of genetics and information in life.
We've seen the core ideas, the potential implications, especially for consciousness in medicine.
And also the significant skepticism and the critical need for rigorous, reproducible evidence that, for the most part, is still lacking according to the mainstream.
It really pushes us to ask big questions at the frontiers of science, doesn't it?
It does. It's inspiring in that sense, even amidst the controversy. It reminds us that nature might be far more complex and interconnected than our current models allow for.
The ultimate test is always empirical evidence, open scientific dialogue.
Exactly. Whether these specific ideas hold up or not, the exploration itself is valuable.
So Teolumen Insights, here's a final thought to chew on. If our DNA can leave some kind of phantom imprint, even if we don't fully understand it yet, what other subtle, maybe non-physical influences might be weaving through our lives, our biology, the universe around us that we're currently completely unaware of?
How would that perspective shift things? Our view of medicine, biology, consciousness itself?
Something to ponder.
Definitely.
Okay, that's all the time we have for this deep dive with Teolumen Insights. If this journey into the quantum edges of biology sparked your curiosity.
Please do like and subscribe. We'll be back with more deep dives into fascinating topics.
Until next time, Teolumen Insights.
Goodbye, everyone.